So you guys know that thing where people say that you can't pat your head and rub your tummy at the same time? Like, anybody ever try to do that? Don't worry, I'm not going to make you do it in church. But what I am going to do today, though, is I want to talk to you about two things that you cannot do at the same time, no matter how hard you try. And not that anybody asked, but I did a little bit of research on things that you can't do at the same time because I was kind of curious. And maybe you guys already knew this, but thanks to M. Adrian for our article titled Top 15 Things You Can't Do at the Same Time, because it's science, okay? And I'm not going to read all of it to you, but I am going to read some of it to you in case some of you don't have plans after church today and you don't know what to do. You could try some of these. And if you do, please tag us on the gram because I would love to see the video. But there's a couple things that you can't do at the same time. You can't swallow with your mouth open, right? And I think most of us already knew that. Did anybody know that? Like, you can't do that. Nobody else knew that? Is I the only person? Okay, I'm going to need you guys to wake up, all right? Come on now. I don't even drink coffee, and I'm wide awake. All right, here's the second thing that you can't do, and you can try these later, but you can't apparently, I tried, I failed. You can't make a square with your left hand and a circle with your right hand at the same time. Those are two things that you can't do. He's trying it in the front row. He's like I'm doing it. Apparently, it's not possible. This one was interesting. You can't burp and toot at the same time, okay? You can try that later again at lunch. Tag us on Instagram. I don't know if I'm allowed to. Can I say toot on stage, Lori? I don't know. I can't. I just did. Okay. I was going to go with fluffy. My kids say fluffy, thanks to Bluey. I don't know if anybody else's kids watch Bluey here, but my kids would say you can't burp and fluffy at the same time. I'll give you one more. Apparently, you can't rotate your leg, lift it up in a clockwise position while drawing the number 6 with your right hand. Okay, you can't do it clockwise and right. I know this sounds so easy, but it's not, because I tried last night and I failed. And not only did I try, but I ran upstairs, and this was so random. My kids were having like a pizza movie night, and I was like, pause the movie. And they're like, what? I'm like, we all have to try this. And I made my whole family lift their foot up and try to do it. My wife was the only person that came close to maybe doing it, but everybody else failed. I even made the 3-year-old do it. I'm like, come on, Lucy, come on, clockwise. You know, she's like, I can't do it. I'm like, try harder, right? But there are some things that we cannot do at the same time, no matter how hard we try. And so what I want to do with our time today is I want to share two things from the scripture that you can't do at the same time, no matter how hard you try. And I imagine some of you are going to take this as a challenge, and you're going to go home and you're going to go, I'm going to prove Pastor wrong. I'm going to do these two things at the same time. And when you do, mark my words, you will fail. You will. When you try it, you will fail. And when you fail, it just might very well be the best thing that's happened to your heart and mind in a long time. 1 Thessalonians is going to be our anchor text for today. Let me build up the context before we start reading it in case you're not familiar. 1 Thessalonians was written by Paul and his friends Silas and Timothy, and it was written to a church that Paul tells us was famous because of how they received the good news of the message of Jesus with joy in the midst of what he called a severe suffering. Okay, and this is a different conversation, for a different day, but how many of you know that it's one thing to receive the good news of the message of Jesus with joy when everything in your life is going the way you want it to go, but it's a whole nother thing to receive the gospel message of Jesus with joy when everything in your life is going the opposite of the way you want it to be going. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like it's one thing to say yes to Jesus with joy when you just got the promotion that you wanted to get, and you got that bonus, and you got that car, and you're riding good, and everything is working out, and that girl you liked, you told her you were digging her chili, and she was digging your chili too, and this is the perfect day ever, and your kids ate everything on their plate, and they didn't complain one time, right? And then one of them after dinner was like, I would like to know how to get baptized. And you're like, wow. And they all went to bed on time. And you're like, dude, I should go play the lottery. This is the greatest day of my life. It's one thing to accept the message with joy when it's all working out the way you'd love for it to work out. But it's a whole nother thing to accept the message with joy when it feels like everything around you is on fire. Okay, anybody ever send that gif lately of the dog sitting in the room that's on fire going, this is fine? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Right, I don't know if we can post gifs in the comments or not, but somebody post that in the comments, because I can't think of a better description of the people that Paul is writing this letter to than the picture of that dog sitting in that room and everything is on fire and the dog is going, this is fine. And what's crazy about this church that Paul is writing to is that they're sitting on fire going, this is fine. Not because they're living in denial. And they aren't going, this is fine because they're doing that thing that some of us, like to do where we come to church and even though we're angry and we're sad and we're distraught, we put a smile on our face and we kind of, hey, hi, brother, and we kind of pretend like everything is going better than it is because we think that's what God wants. No, this church that he is writing to was famous for their faith because the writer says that they had joy in the midst of severe suffering, right? They had the kind of faith, we're going to find out here in a little bit, that could literally sit in the fire. And if you've been around, you've probably heard me say this before, but I am so thankful that the gospel writers didn't pretend like following Jesus insulates you from suffering. Okay, and if you're new to this, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the New Testament and the Old Testament writers, the gospel writers, if you look in the Bible, they don't take the whole following Jesus doesn't insulate you from suffering and put it in the fine print. No, it's on the front page. Jesus himself said that in this world you will have trouble. And so the good news is not that when we say yes to Jesus, then everything works out well and we never experience pain and suffering. No, the good news is because Jesus says, in spite of the pain and suffering that you're going to experience, I can sustain you. The good news is good news because Jesus promises to keep our hearts alive when life punches us in the face. And I wasn't sure if I was going to share this story, but one of my really good friends just went through, I don't know, maybe the worst thing anyone can go through, and lost his mom not too long ago, and it's been brutal. It's been brutal, just trying to figure out a way to walk with him through it, and he had an opportunity to come to a show that was a part of on this tour a couple weeks ago in Grand Rapids, and he drove to the show and just wanted to kind of be there, just worshiping God, and man, there's this moment. Every time I think about it, I get emotional, but he's just sitting there, and I'm in the corner just kind of watching him, trying to give him this space, and we're singing this song. And these are the words of the song. The song says this. It says, when I should have lost my mind, when pain tried to take my joy, God, you kept my heart alive. You kept my heart alive. And man, guys, I wish I could have bottled up that moment and just show it to you. But I can't tell you I don't even know how to put it into words what it was like to just stand in the corner and just watch my friend who's going through maybe the worst thing you could ever go through in his life with tears streaming down his face, just saying over and over and over again, God, you kept my heart alive when pain tried to take my joy. You kept my heart alive in the midst of the fire, in the midst of unimaginable tragedy, just saying, God, you kept my heart alive. Okay, and I know that some of you would like it better if I came up here today and told you that following Jesus is going to insulate you from suffering. I know you would like it if I told you, hey, my sermon today is here are the 10 things that you can do to not have any more pain and suffering in your life. I wish I could give you that promise, fam, but I can't. I can't promise you that following Jesus is going to protect you from pain and suffering. I can't promise you that all the circumstances are going to work out in your life just because you love Jesus. But here's what I can promise you. I can promise you that Jesus can sustain you. I can promise you that when the you-know-what hits the fan, Jesus, in the midst of that, is able to keep your heart alive. I can promise you that it is possible with Jesus to find joy and peace in the midst of your suffering. I love the way Hannah put it last week. Wasn't that an amazing sermon, by the way? Completely crushed it. Like, not just in the room. I was texting this morning. I was like, listen, man, your sermon's been up on YouTube for like less than 6 days, and it got way more views than any sermon I've preached in the last 6 months, okay? I was like, that's amazing. I'm like, I'm here for it. I love that. But listen to this quote, what she said. It was so good. She says, the world tells us that joy is only possible in the absence of pain. But the gospel says joy can be accessed even in the midst of our pain. Right? And that's different, right? The world's like, hey, man, I'm going to, like, we're all trying out there. We're all hustling. We're all trying to find the way to just have comfort and to avoid the pain and the suffering. But we live in a broken world. There's always going to be pain and suffering. But Jesus offers us a way in the midst of it. I don't know if Hannah meant to do this or not, but I love that she used the word access. Because the implication is that there is joy that has already been made available to you and I in every circumstance of life. Which begs the question, how do we access it? Right? The question is not, can we have joy? No, Jesus already said that I can give you joy. I've made joy accessible to you. The question then becomes, how can we access that joy in the midst of our pain and suffering the way the people in Thessalonian church did, right? Paul says in the midst of severe suffering that they welcome the good news with joy. And I know when a lot of us, read about people like this in the Bible, and maybe it's just me, but we're just like, well, those guys are super Christians, right? Anybody think that? They're like, of course they did. Yeah, they're not like, those guys were like, they're amazing. They're in a different league. Can't compare them to me. But what if that's not the case? Like, what if I told you that the people in the letter we're about to read were ordinary people just like you and I? Like those guys put their pants on the same way you do, one leg at a time. I promise you they were normal, ordinary, broken people. And what we're about to see today is that it may sound super spiritual, but it's actually a lot simpler than you and I have made it out to be able to find joy and peace in every circumstance that we're in. Can I show you what I'm talking about? Are you guys tracking with me? By the way, I'm so excited for this text. This is awesome, all right? I hope you're excited. I'm just going to be up here excited by myself, which I'm okay with that. I don't mind throwing a party just for myself. But listen to what Paul says. We're going to go to the very end of the letter, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and Paul is speaking here. And I want you to hear what he tells these guys towards the end of his letter. Again, remember the context. Paul himself just said these people are going through severe suffering. So this wasn't like the best day of their lives. This was like the worst season of their lives. And Paul knows that. And listen to how he lands in his letter. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, we're going to start in verse 12. Listen to what he says. He says, now we ask you, he's landing the plane on this long letter that he wrote him. He's saying, brothers and sisters, I want you to acknowledge those who work hard among you, those who care for you in the Lord, those who admonish you. I want you to honor them. Paul's like, how there's people around you who they just do a lot of work and they're caring for you, not because they have to, but they're caring for you because they care about God. And they care. There's those people in the church, all those people. He's like, man, I want you to honor them. I want you to acknowledge them. And then he says in verse 13, I want you to hold them in the highest regard of love, in love, because of their work. He says, I want you to live in peace with the people that you get along with. No? Right? I want you to live in peace with the people who have the same personalities and you guys are into the same thing, like the same sports teams, like the same restaurants, Make sure you kind of get along with those people. No, Paul says, doesn't matter what your personality is, what your Enneagram is, what you're into, what your hobby is, what your activity is. He's like, I want you to live in peace with each other. Verse 14, and he says, we urge you, brothers and sisters, to warn those who are idle and disruptive. The message paraphrase, I love it, says, I want you to warn all the freeloaders. Right? Apparently they had freeloaders in this church too, right? It's like, okay, great, right? Warn all the freeloaders, it says in the message, and all the people who love to argue in the Facebook comments. I want you to warn them. It doesn't say that next part, but same difference, right? The idle and the disruptive. I want you to encourage the disheartened. Help the weak. I want you, he says, to be patient with everybody. Make sure nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. I left for this tour a couple weeks ago, and before I left, I did the same thing that I did every tour I've ever done. I called all my girls together in a huddle, right? The Uber's in the driveway. I'm about to get a huddle, and so I got all the kids, and they all got in a little huddle, and I went around the circle. I was like, Lucy, okay, listen to me. I'm like, look at me. I'm the captain. Look at me, right? I'm like, I know you three. I'm like, that thing that you do in nap when mom puts you in nap and then you don't nap and then we come in the room an hour later and you think it's funny to be like, I didn't nap. You think it's real cute. I'm like, it is kind of cute, but I need you to not do that in the next 3 weeks, okay? I need you to nap. I need you to listen to mommy and don't do that. Okay, you got it? And she's like, yeah, I got it. I'm like, okay, Lola, all right, this thing, that thing that you do. I know you like potty humor and poopy jokes, and you love to go in your sister's room and sit on their bed with your underwear. You think it's funny. They think it's annoying, and it is kind of funny, to be honest. But I'm going to need you not to do that in the next 3 weeks. Nora, I know you love food. I know when your sisters aren't looking, you reach in their plate and take their food, and it's like, I know you love food, but I'm going to need you to just not do that. And Eden, I need you to actually be helpful. I know you love to argue. I don't know where you got that from. You just love to talk. I'm going to need you to not do that with your mom when I'm gone. And above all else, I'm going to need you guys to be kind to each other, okay? Don't push each other. Don't just be kind, okay? You got it, okay? And I got Ring cameras around the house. I am watching you, okay? But I just got it. And everybody say, yes, Daddy, we got it. We understand, Daddy. We understand that what you're trying to tell us, which is that when you're not here, you're still going to hold us to the standard and the culture of our home. Right? And what Paul is doing here when he's given all these rapid fire instructions, like honor them and warn these people and do this and don't let people sit around. What he's doing here is he's trying to just remind them that, hey, I know you guys are going through a lot right now, but there's still a standard and an expectation for how you're supposed to treat each other. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But here's what I want to spend the rest of our time in. I want to draw your attention to what Paul says to them after reminding them of the expectation and the standard for how to treat each other, right? And so Paul ends his letter by going, hey, here are the things I need you to do for one another so the church can be healthy. And then he shifts gears and says, now here's the things I want you to do for yourselves so your heart can stay healthy. And that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time. Are you guys tracking with me, right? Okay, all right, perfect. It would be nice to get, yeah, amen. I'm with you. It's been a minute. I just need to know that I'm not just talking to myself. But listen to how he shifts gear. Listen to what he says in verse 16. He says, verse 16, he starts this way. He says, rejoice always. Right? And I think I've said this once, 3 times, maybe 30 times before. But don't you just love it when you're having the worst day ever and you're going through the worst thing in the world and some Christian brother or sister rolls up to you and they're just like, hey, God is good. And, rejoice. The joy of the Lord is my strength. And you're like, shut up. I mean, you don't say that. You smile back and he is good all the time. But inside you're like, ah. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, doesn't it just grind your gears when you have just cause? Like, I'm not just talking like you're throwing yourself a pity party because no, I'm talking you have justifiable reason to be miserable and to be angry at God and things aren't going the way. I mean, the whole thing is on fire and you're mad and somebody rolls up to you and you're like, yo, brother, rejoice. Right? I mean, they're going through severe suffering. Right? And Paul's like, hey, rejoice always. And if you think that's insensitive, wait till you hear what he says next. Listen, he says, rejoice always. And then he says this. He says, I want you to pray continually. Let me put this in context for you, okay? Just imagine. I know it's a little bit different, but imagine that, again, you're going through like the worst season of your life and things are just hard. I want you to imagine that you roll up to your circle. You go to your small group, and you sit in the circle and how are you doing? I'm like, I just need to tell you guys are my people, man. This is the worst season of my life. Everything that could go wrong, I lost my job, I lost this, I lost that, and I just feel like God's let me down and nothing's going well, and I just don't even know if God is for me or if he loves me, and this is just the worst thing I don't even see a way out of this, and I'm just telling you guys because you guys are my people, and this is just so hard. Imagine if you said that and someone in your circle was like, and you're like, yeah, and he's like, maybe you want to rejoice a little bit. I don't know. Imagine if you said that and someone's like, hey, I don't know how you've been doing lately with your prayer, but you might want to up your prayer quarter. Okay, maybe you should like pray more. Have you thought about praying more? Right? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm like, are you kidding me? I want you to pray for me. I don't need you to tell me to pray more. Right? You would think that Paul would say, hey, I'm praying for you continually. But no. Paul's talking to people who are suffering. He's like, hey, I want you to rejoice always. And I want you to, probably pray more. Pray continually. Okay, and I wasn't there, so I can't verify this. But I have to think that these people were so glad that there was a comma at the end of pray continually. Did you guys see that? It says, rejoice always, pray continually, comma. Right? They had to have been so glad, because I believe that what Paul says next is what actually unlocks the entire verse. And so let's read the whole thing. He says, I want you to rejoice always, pray continually, comma. And then he says this. He says, I want you to give thanks in all circumstances. For, he says, this is God's will for you. Rejoice, pray, give thanks. Not only when things are going well and you got the thing you want to do and you're sitting before a meal and you're thanking God for the apps or whatever. No. It's like, I want you to give thanks in every circumstance, no matter what happens. And then he puts a stamp on it just so you know this is God's will for you. And I don't know if this is still a thing, but I remember when I was a young adult, in my 20s, I got my young adults over here. I remember like the biggest question that my friends and I were asking was, what's God's will for my life? Right? Anybody remember that? We're like, what's God? I just want to know what God's will, man. We go to all these conferences. Somebody just tell me what God's will is for my life. We would have a minute to talk to the speaker at the conference, and we're like, I just trying to figure out God's will for my life. I don't know what God's will is for my life. And if you've ever been a part of that conversation, you know that 9.9 out of 10 times when we say that, what we're saying is, I just want to know if God wants me to go with, Ricky, Jimmy, or Bob, Like, I just want to know if God wants me to go to Baltimore, Phoenix, or Toledo. Like, that's what we're saying. Like, what's God's will for my life? We're thinking career, and we're thinking profession, and we're thinking the person we're going to end up with, and should we have a kid or not, and should I buy that house? Like, what is God's will? And I don't think there's anything wrong trying to figure out if God wants you to pick between Ricky, Bobby, and Joey, right? Anybody here dating a Ricky, Bobby, or Joey, by the way? Okay, no, don't raise your hand. That would be weird if you're dating all three at the same time, But I just thought I would throw that out there. That's a different conversation for a different day. There's nothing wrong with trying to figure out which option you should pick. But I think that it's kind of sad that my friends and I spent years trying to figure out God's will when it's so clear in the Bible. Paul's like, I'll tell you what God's will is. Let me show you again. Rejoice always, pray continuously. I want you to give thanks in all circumstances. This is God's will for you. And we're like, great, but that doesn't help me pick between Bobby, Joey, and Ricky. Should I move to Phoenix or should I stay in Toledo? Like, I just want to know what his will. And he's saying, hey, give thanks in all circumstances. This is his will. And we're like, that's not helpful. But what if that's the point? What if the point is that Paul is saying, hey, as much as you can try, there's nothing you can do to really control. I mean, it's great that you want to know which choice you should make, but here's the deal. There's nothing you can really do at the end of the day to control how the circumstances of your life turn out. No matter, anybody old enough and done this long enough to know that you can pick and you can choose and you can program it all out, but you can't really control. Anybody I'm talking about? Like there's nothing you can do to guarantee control of the outcomes of the circumstances of your life. But Paul's saying, hey, I'm going to tell you something right now. There is something that you can do to control the condition of your heart. And that is to give thanks. Now, before you roll your eyes, remember that Paul knew that the people he was writing to were going through severe suffering. And yet, he pens a letter to them and says, hey, I want you to rejoice, give thanks, and I want you to pray. I want you to give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for your life. Why in the world would Paul say that to people that he knew were suffering? Here's what I think. Nobody's asking, but I'm going to tell you anyways. I think Paul said that because Paul in part knew that there are some things that you can't do at the same time, no matter how hard you try. And I know I took a long way to get back here. But can I put some meat on the bones of this conversation for you? Right? I want to share with you. I just want to make this super practical, right? We're talking about joy in the midst of our pain, and how do we do that? Well, I want to tell you how to do that by telling you two things that you can't do at the same time, no matter how hard you try. And here's the first thing. We cannot continually give thanks to Jesus and continually be miserable, i.e., be without joy at the same time. We cannot, I'll read it one more time, continually give thanks to Jesus and continually be miserable without joy at the same time. And I think Paul knew this. I think Paul knew that it's not possible for human beings to continually give thanks to God and continually be miserable at the same time. And I think that explains why Paul would write a letter to people who he knew were going through severe suffering, and he would end his letter by saying, hey, I want you to give thanks in every circumstance, when things are going good and when things are going bad. And we read that and we go, that is so insensitive. But maybe it's not insensitive. Maybe this was Paul's way of letting them know that the joy that they were looking for and the gratitude that they can express are inescapably linked. Right? Like the reason that Paul tells us to give thanks in all circumstances is because Paul wants us to know that there is a cause and effect to our ability to give thanks and our ability to experience joy. The reason Paul is writing this letter and telling people, again, who are suffering, that he wants them to give thanks in all circumstance is because he knew that giving thanks is how we practically access the joy that Jesus has already made available to us in our pain. And I know that a lot of you probably didn't like it when I say it this is the first time, and you're not going to like it when I say it the second time. But I cannot promise you a life without pain. I can't, and I want to, for what it's worth. I wish I could. I wish I could get up here and be like, hey, man, if you do A, B, and C, it's all going to work out. I can't promise you that. But what I can promise you, though, is that it is possible for you to have joy in the midst of your pain. What I can't promise you, though, is that if you will embrace this practice that Paul is calling these people to embrace, if you would embrace the practice and the discipline of giving thanks to God in every circumstance that you are in, doing that will give you access to a joy that you didn't think was possible. When you cannot find a way out of your pain, giving thanks is how we give a way for joy to come in. And for some of us, the idea of being able to find joy in the midst of what we're going through just feels like the most impossible thing in the world. And so Paul's like, hey, let me put some meat on the bones. Let me make this practical for you. He's like, I want you to give thanks in all circumstance, because when you do that, it makes it possible for you to touch the very thing that seems so far away. Giving thanks in all circumstance allows us to have access to the joy that Jesus already provided for us. Okay, and I know that for some of us this is gonna be kind of touchy, but it is something that in spite of everything that you've been through, or in spite of everything that some of us are going through, that we still have something to be thankful for. Okay, and I'm not trying to be insensitive. Okay, I promise you, I'm not trying to be cliche. I spent so much time thinking about how to navigate this and how to really deliver what I'm about to say, because I know from firsthand experience that there are some of you in the room right now, and this is the worst year of your life. I know firsthand that there are some of you that could not wait for Thanksgiving to be over, because Thanksgiving was just a reminder of what you lost. I know that, and I'm not trying to be insensitive to that. And I know it hasn't been perfect. I know it's been difficult. I know it's been hard. But isn't it something that in spite of all of that, you still have something to be thankful for? Okay, and I'm not going to ask for a show of whatever, but there's some of you in this room, and maybe you're not in it. Maybe you were in it, but there's some of you in the room, and you didn't even think you were going to make it. Like there was a time in your life where if somebody would have sat you down and put a mic in your face, you would have said, if you were honest, I'm not going to make it out of this. You were convinced you weren't going to make it. The people around you didn't think you weren't going to make it. But here we are, November 26th, and you're still here. You're still breathing. You're still singing. You're still hoping. You're still loving. You're still praying. It hasn't been perfect, but you are still here because God sustained you, because God kept your heart alive. He kept your heart alive. He sustained you. And I appreciate the little, but come on now. Is it not true? Is it not true that he kept you through it all? Is it not true that he carried you through it all? Is it not true that he is the one who kept you alive when you thought what you were going through was going to take you out? He kept you alive. He sustained you. Cancer almost took you out. Bankruptcy almost took you out. Your trial almost took you out. Your divorce almost took you out. But God said, I have other plans. God said, not today, Satan. God said, that's my child. God said, I'm not finished yet. God said, I can redeem that. God said, I can turn that around. God said, I'm not going to give up on you. God said, I'm always going to be there. God said, you're going to live. You're not going to die, but you're going to live and give glory to God. But God rescued you. But God sustained you. I know it was hard. I know it's hard. I know it's brutal, but come on now, isn't it crazy that in spite of all of that, you still have something to thank God for? And so Paul says to these people who are going through it, he says, hey, he says, I want you, I know it sounds crazy, but he says, I want you to rejoice and I want you to pray. And he says, I want you to give thanks. And the reason he says he wants them to give thanks is because he knows that it's in giving thanks that they're going to experience the joy that he is leading them to. Paul says, I want you to give thanks because gratitude and the joy you're looking for are linked together. He says, I want you to give thanks in all circumstances, even when it's real bad. Find something to thank God, because there are some things you can't do at the same time no matter how hard you try. And one of them is you can't give thanks to God and be miserable and joyless at the same time. The second thing that we can't do at the same time no matter how hard we try is that we cannot continually give thanks to Jesus and continually be anxious without peace at the same time. Can't do it. Somebody please try it when you get home. I dare you. I triple dog dare you to try it. But you cannot, and I'm not talking a one-time drop in, I'm going to have this little prayer. No, I'm saying that you cannot continually, you can't have the practice or the discipline or the habit of saying, I'm going to do what Paul says here is God's will for my life. I'm going to give thanks to God, to Jesus continually. You can't do that and not have peace. You can't do that and continually be anxious. And we know that not just because the Bible teaches it. We know that because all the secular research tells us the same. And you can look it up when you get home. I don't want to bore you because some of you could care less about this, but I just want to show you that I'm not making this up. I looked this up, and they said this. They said gratitude. Okay, this is not from like a Christian Bible preacher person. No, this is just like secular research. Gratitude, excuse me, releases toxic emotions. Anybody would like to release some toxic emotions, right? I don't know if anybody in the room like, I would like to keep my toxic emotions. You know, it makes my life better, right? Reduces pain, improves sleep quality, aids in stress regulation, and secular research says it reduces anxiety and depression. The Mindful Awareness Research Center of UCLA stated that gratitude does change the neural structures in the brain. It makes us happier and more content. Scientists have suggested that by activating the reward center of the brain, gratitude actually alters the way we see the world and the way we see ourselves. You cannot continually give thanks to God in gratitude and continually live in anxiety at the same time. And maybe it's not anxiety for you. If you wrote that down, maybe above anxiety, you can throw in worried or panicked, distraught, fearful. Same difference. You can't give thanks and keep that at the same time. Here's how Paul put it in his letter that he wrote to the Philippian church. Just real quick, in Philippians chapter 4. And this letter is so interesting because Paul writes in Thessalonians, and they were going through it. But when Paul is writing Philippians, I love it because Paul is under chains, and he doesn't know if he's going to make it out. Okay, so he's not sitting at Starbucks at exit 51, air conditioning, drinking his mocha, whatever, and typing this letter. No, he is in jail. Some people believe chained to a guard when he is writing this letter. And listen to what he has to say about anxiety. This guy is in jail. He's not sure if he's going to make it out. Listen to what he says. Rejoice, he says, in the Lord. There he goes again, telling us to rejoice. I will say it again. I love that. Right? Because he's like, I know some of you are going to read over that and be like, it's like, I'm going to say it again. For those in the back, rejoice, exclamation mark, rejoice. You're like, thank you. Okay, that really helped. That now that you yelled it, now I will rejoice, right? Thank you. Appreciate that. He says, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Then he says this. He says, do not be anxious about anything. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I first read that, that made me more anxious, right? Because there's nothing that can make you more anxious than when you're anxious, someone's like, don't be anxious. You're like, thanks. Now I'm anxious about being anxious. Okay, that did not help me at all. Don't be anxious about everything. And before you could ask him, like, well, how do I do that, man? If I could, I would have done it. He's like, I'll tell you how. If you keep reading, I'll tell you how you do that. Here's how you not be anxious about everything. He says, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving. There it is again, right? There's that connection again. There's Paul again trying to link our ability to be thankful and to give thanks to our ability to experience joy. So he starts again like he did in Thessalonians with joy, rejoice, rejoice. And we're like, how do I do that when things aren't going well? He's like, I'll tell you how you do that. I'm going to tell you, you're going to do it by giving thanks. And in Philippians, he says, here's how you do it. In every situation, in everything you're going through, good, bad, horrible, awful, awesome. It doesn't matter. By prayer and petition, talk to God, talk to him often. Same thing in Thessalonians, with thanksgiving. He says, present your requests to God. And then he makes a promise. Okay, if you're looking for a guarantee, some of you like money back guarantee. Here's your guarantee. Here's his promise. You do that. And Paul's like, I'm going to write you a check right now. I promise you it's not going to bounce. Here's what's going to happen. He says, and the peace of God, which transcends understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And everybody said, yes, please. More. Could anybody use a servant of a peace that transcends understanding? Right? Not like the peace that the world's trying to sell us. No, the peace he's talking about here is the kind of peace that people will look at you and go, that does not make any sense. It's the kind of peace that can sit in a room that's on fire and you're peaceful. And everyone around you is panicked. And they're going, this does not make any sense. And that's not saying that it's not hard or that you don't have hard days or there aren't days where you cry out and you're like, God, I need your help. It doesn't mean that we're not believing that God will change our circumstances. It just means that Paul is saying, hey, when you embrace this practice of gratitude, God is going to replace that with a peace that's not going to make any sense. It's a kind of peace that transcends human understanding. I know I've shared this story many times before, but I'll never forget when I went to Haiti in 2010, and Haiti had just experienced that earthquake that they went through, one of the worst, disasters in human history, I believe, still. And I went I don't know, maybe a month after it happened. It was a month after it happened. Went to Haiti, and everything was still shut down, and we had to go through some back roads and go through the DR. And I don't know if anybody remembers this. But I remember before I went, sitting in my living room, and I remember watching CNN and watching Anderson Cooper, and I remember he's there, and he's in Ground Zero in Port-au-Prince, and he's talking about at this point, they don't know how many people have died, and this is one of the worst disasters ever, and he's just going through all of this stuff, and I remember literally in the midst of his live press conference, he's like, there's a sound that we're hearing right now, and we don't know what that sound is, and we don't know if there's another earthquake or what's happening, but we're going to go investigate the sound. And I remember how confused Anderson was when he walked over to investigate the sound. And he's like, the sound is actually a sound of people worshiping God. And he's like, they're giving thanks to God. And you could just see the confusion on his face. Okay, and I would not have believed it if I wasn't there myself. I went to Haiti, and I remember the 1 month of the earthquake, a month after it happened, they shut the entire city down. Like the markets were closed, the shops were closed, the offices were closed, and everybody gathered under tents because there weren't any buildings. And I remember standing in a tent, shoulder to shoulder, with hundreds of Haitians 1 month after the earthquake that killed thousands of people. And I remember my jaw hit the ground, and I couldn't even sing any of the songs, and I couldn't even participate because I was so confused as to why they were so joyful and why they were giving thanks. They were standing on the rubble of an earthquake that took out their family members and their friends, and they are jumping and they are giving thanks with joy and worshiping God and throwing their hands in here and thanking Jesus that they are still alive. And I'm sitting here going, this doesn't make any sense. I think it's so funny how we're sitting on our couch in America watching TV going, how can a good God let that happen? And I think it's just ironic that when you go to those people, they're over there going, God, thank you for my breath. Thank you for bringing us through this. Thank you for being a good God. It didn't make any sense. Okay, now don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there wasn't pain. I'm not saying that people didn't cry, because they did. There was so much pain, and there were so many tears, and there were so many bad days. But you know what else there was? There was so much joy, and there was so much peace. And the reason there was so much joy and so much peace is not because all of the Haitians are super Christians. No, I think the reason is because they knew something that a lot of us still haven't learned. I think they knew that when life punches you in the face, one of the best things that you can actually do, as counterintuitive as it seems, is to give thanks to God. Because when you give thanks to God, you have access to the joy that's already been made available for you in the pain. When you give thanks to God in all circumstances, regardless of what's happening to you, there is a peace of God that transcends all understanding that God makes available to you. I think the Haitian church knew that there are two things that you can't do at the same time. They knew that it was impossible for them to continue to give thanks to God and still be miserable, and it was impossible for them to continue to give thanks to God and still not have peace. And so they chose to give thanks to God. And when they did, I saw a joy like I have never seen before in the midst of the worst suffering that I have ever seen. And I don't know what season of life you're in today. Maybe some of you are like, our life's going great. Awesome. Maybe life's going awful. The invitation is the same. God is saying, my will for you is to give thanks in all circumstance. Can I give you guys a little homework? I know you didn't come to church for homework. Some of you are like, dude, man, can we save that for school? It's real simple, I promise you. But here's the homework that I have for you guys, real simple. Every day, I was going to say this week, but I'm going to say every day for the rest of the year. I know that's hard, but it's real simple. Okay, I would love it if you try to do this every day for the rest of the year. Okay, and you're gonna miss some days. That's okay. No one's gonna keep track. But this is so good for your heart. Every day for the rest of this year. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a moment in your day to give thanks to God for something. Just find one thing every day, and then I want you to do something. I want you to write it down. Right, because when we write something down, I think it sticks more. There's something in our memory that I can't really explain it, but that's what the research says, that when we write things down, like it just takes it a little bit deeper. You guys got some time, right? So I want you to write it down, and I want you to think about it before you fall asleep. So you know that thing that a lot of us do where we lay in bed, and what do we do when we lay in bed? Thinking about all the day and the things that you didn't get done. And oh man, tomorrow I got to get the kids and go to school and blah, blah, blah. How about this? How about let's just try it. How about when you lay in bed tonight and you're about to go to sleep, just think about that one thing. God, I just want to thank you. I know it's not the way I thought it was going to go, but I just want to thank you. I know my kids were kind of crazy today, but I just want to thank you that I have kids that can be crazy. I just want to take a moment to thank you. So give thanks, write it down, and think about it before you fall asleep. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say these kind of things, but man, I believe that this, maybe more than anything else, is the only reason why my heart has not been jaded. I think the only reason that God has sustained me through COVID and all the crazy stuff that's happening with this job is because by God's grace, I've tried my best for the last 2 or 3 years every single day. And I don't do it perfectly, and I'll miss some days here and there. But every day I'm like, God, I'm gonna thank you for something. I'm gonna write it down, and when I lay down at bed at night, I'm gonna make sure it's the last thing that I think about. And I don't know where you're gonna write your stuff, but I write my stuff in my notes, right? And so on November 1st, I wrote down in my notes, and you can go, there's years in here. I said, God, I thank you for resurrecting dreams. I was so sad when blank didn't happen, but then you brought it back, and I don't deserve it, but I just want to thank you for that. November 2nd, God, I want to thank you for this amazing experience I'm a part of on this tour. I'm so grateful to be here. November 3rd, God, I thank you for your voice. I thank you that I can actually hear you, and it's real, and you lead me. Thank you for the Holy Spirit. November 4th, thank you for always doing more than I could ever imagine. I was sick on 11/13. I said, thank you for good health. All the times that I had it, I was sitting in my basement. I had chills and I had cold and I felt miserable. And I said, God, man, thank you for all the days when I didn't feel miserable. Thank you for all the days when I wasn't sick. Thank you for all the days when I've been healthy. Every day, I'm going to find something to give thanks to God. I'm going to write it down. I'm going to think about it before I fall asleep, because I know that there are some things I can't do at the same time, no matter how hard I try. And I'm going to do it because I want the joy that God promised. And I want peace in my life.